Thank you for coming out this early on Thursday, second day of UMGEOCON. I hope that all of you have looked at the bios. I'm here to introduce Jarlath Dunn. I'm not going to read this bio to you, mostly because for about 15 years now, Jarlath and I started working together about 15 years ago. And for the bulk of that time, we've collaborated on a number of projects. So what I thought I would share is stuff outside the bio, namely a brief story and then a couple of observations about Jarlath that I have from working with him. My first story comes from when we first started working together. He hired me as a digitizer in the spatial analysis lab at the University of Vermont. I spent almost 2 years digitizing land use and land cover. Rather tedious job, and after about, 6 months of that, he said, hey, there's this software out there that actually creates the polygons for you, and then we'll label them. And he was referring to e-cognition, or object-based image analysis, an approach we've both used extensively in our careers. So the 2 points that I wanted to make about Jarlath is, we had this idea with the keynotes of having a theme of where have we been, where are we now, and where are we going. Jarlath fits the where are we now. And when I think of Jarlath, I think of him as an early adopter. And I don't necessarily mean the first person to install the new point version of a software package and find all the bugs, although he is very good at that. I think of a lot of the research that he's been involved in and how he's adopted new data or existing data and new approaches and done innovative things with them that contribute to not just the research community, but also to production geospatial work. And that covers a suite of things from natural resources to social issues like environmental justice and public health to, in some cases, defense applications. The other thing I wanted to mention is in terms of Jarlath as a mentor. He's involved with AmericaView. He's the chair of AmericaView, which is trying to advance remote sensing education in the United States, which I think is very good. He teaches, but he also has probably had hundreds, if not thousands, of staff and students that have gone out into the public and private sector in this field that are doing great things. And they're in universities and some well-known private companies like Google. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Awesome, thanks Keith. When Keith called me up and asked if I would come out to Wisconsin for this presentation, he mentioned how they're looking for someone who's exceptionally charismatic, good looking, a dynamic speaker, and really was a leader in the geospatial field. And he said that person was not available due to scheduling conflicts, and would I consider filling in? So I did say yes. And another comment on the title of my presentation is someone in the room from the federal government informed me this morning, maybe you should already have titled this the drones are here. But when we talk about UAS technology today, I think it's easily to become obsessed with things like the platforms and the sensors around it, right? And maybe we'll dive into a little bit about the wonderful image processing technology and advances in computer vision that allow us to go from individual image capture to actual geospatial products. Sometimes we get a little bit into GIS integration. We may touch on extracting information. How often do we really get down into the weeds and decide or discuss how UAS technology is informing better decision making? And at the end, I'd like to wrap things up by talking about what we see as the challenges for implementing UAS technology into organizations and why the GIS profession is really so important. Okay, so at the University of Vermont, a number of years ago, after we got nailed with a major tropical storm that dumped about a foot of rain overnight in some areas, caused hundreds of millions of dollars of damage to our transportation infrastructure In Vermont, we have these things called mountains. I know not all of you from this area are familiar with such topographic features, but when that much water hits, right, it rushes down, and our roads and our hydrologic networks are connected, and it really did tremendous damage. And I found that our traditional methods of doing remote sensing, the satellite manned air platforms, were just not good enough. So we set up an unmanned aircraft systems team with the goal of having organic remote sensing capabilities for doing data capture, 3D modeling, measurements, all the stuff that we want to do as GIS professionals. But what I'd like to focus on today is a little bit of a story of one particular project that had an impact to a local community. Okay, this is about a town in Plainfield. Like a lot of towns in New England, it's located near a water source. That water source was a wonderful benefit to the community in terms of the power that it provided. However, where the infrastructure was built and where the homes were built is perhaps no longer an ideal location. And Plainfield and its transportation infrastructure is extremely vulnerable now to extreme weather events. It's a town of 1,200 people, and every few years or so, some extreme weather event comes through and causes situations like this, essentially cutting off one half of the town from the other. So this is a story about how some college students, my students, made use of drone technology, and at the end we even got an award out of this, although there was no trophy or cash prize associated with that, sadly. Okay, so let's take a look about where we are. So here we are in Vermont. That little star there in central Vermont is the town of Plainfield, not too far from Keith's hometown there. Okay, and let's zoom in here. All right, here we are in Plainfield. This river that we see here is called the Great Brook. Okay, and as you can see, it cuts through town and crosses over roads in two places here. All right, so it's a stream that runs through the center of the town. The town of Plainfield is on both sides there, right? And what we had over one night a couple of years ago was this extreme weather event. So very, very localized, and in the course of a few hours on a Sunday evening, about 5 inches of rain fell. Okay, so a major, major, heavily localized storm in this area. Okay, some of the pictures I showed you before, what happened in that stream is all this woody debris came down. It's a stream with rather severe erosion issues, collected at the bridge here, and caused extensive damage, cutting off one half of the town from the other. Now, this is the type of event that FEMA doesn't roll up with all the white trucks, right? No, the Army Corps of Engineers aren't going to launch their planes to capture data. The international charter is not going to be activated so that Digital Globe is acquiring data. Okay, this is a town of 1,200 people with a bridge that sustained $95,000 worth of damage that's now just cut off from one side or the other, right? Aside from Plainfield and the immediate vicinity, no one knows about this event. But to this community, it's real impactful, right? And so with drone technology, we can do things like we can go in after the event, right, and get nice images like this. So you can see the bridge the morning after, you can see the woody debris, you can begin to see how the water moved around that, where the bridge was dammed up there temporarily, all those types of things. And that's great. But really the question here for the community was, how do we redesign a bridge so that it can withstand all the woody debris that we have in the stream and withstand these extreme weather events? So they hired an engineering company we've got in New England, Malone and McBroom. And Malone and McBroom had 3 important questions about the woody debris in the stream. Okay, those trees, those logs that fall into the stream that were repeatedly causing these problems. Okay, they wanted to know how much there was of this woody debris. They wanted to know where it was, right? And then they wanted to know what happened to it during extreme weather events. Okay, so 3 different questions they needed. And if they had this information, there's been formulas that the FARSA was developed way back in the 50s and 60s that tell you if you've got this much woody debris in an event, you know there's precipitation, you can figure out how to design your transportation infrastructure, whether it's a culvert or a bridge, to accommodate this type of stuff, right? And so you can get out there and you can manually inventory that type of stuff. We can have with a GPS. This is George Springsteen, he's a faculty member at Warwick University. George was out there one time. This is in central Vermont, not known for cell phone coverage and things like that. This is a stream with a lot of challenging terrain, okay, really steep eroded banks. And George actually slipped down one of those banks, got his leg caught and broke it in a pile of woody debris, and couldn't get a cell phone signal for 3 hours, okay? And fortunately, his wife finally decided to come out looking for him. You know, George is George has got a nice wife to come out and look for him. I think my wife may not notice me for 2 or 3 days, but unfortunately for George, he's got a happy marriage and they got him out of there. But the point here is, right, that this is actually dangerous. Doing this type of field work is dangerous, and extremely time consuming, it's costly. And if we want to figure out what happens to this woody debris after these extreme weather events, this is not the way to do it. It's just way too slow, okay? So it seems like a really good case to use UAS technology for something like this, right? We're not going to be able to use satellites. They don't have the right resolution. On top of that, Vermont, the cloudiest state in the union, we get like one clear Landsat scene every summer. Okay, that's sort of the reality for us. Okay, manned aircraft just way, way too expensive and they move a lot for something like that. So we set up a long-term monitoring plan in the town of Plainfield using UAS technology. So for 7 months, starting in December and moving through what we thought was going to be flood season, which was the spring, but actually was a really dry spring, so we didn't have any floods until that July storm came and caused the damage that I showed you. So we've been flying on a regular basis. We've done 12 missions in the area, okay, about 3 miles of stream, coming out every several weeks or at least every month, flying the stream, right? So we're constantly getting out there and collecting data, cost efficient, effective, quick, all those types of things. Okay, so I'd like to talk about how we did it and how we went through the entire workflow, because really this isn't just about the drone technology, right? It's about how we just use drones to capture geospatial data that we could then use to make decisions. And so let's dive in here and just show you some stuff. So I'm going to ask Michael here, our technical assistant, to play the video. So the first thing is we've got really good teams and young people with their drones, and they make use of our flight checklist. So we're always going through, and every time we're verifying that we've gone through and made sure that the system is set up and working correctly. So we take this really seriously, in addition to wearing things like hard hats and safety vests, because people question you a lot less when you're wearing those types of things. All right? And then there's flight planning. If we go ahead and play this video here. What's really nice, especially for people like me that are 40 and probably should be flying drones, right? Because I grew up in Nintendo up, down, left, right, A, B, and the drone controllers with like 2 joysticks and like 7 buttons now, way too complicated for some of my skills. But the fact that we have drones now, we can just go out, we can set up a flight plan, toss it up in the air, and it'll go and do its mapping technology, right? I remember when I took air photo interpretation and photogrammetry from Ross Congleton, we could do this stuff manually. I think my homework assignment took me like 3 days to lay out all the flight lines. Now the software is just making it so incredibly easy for us. So once again, I'll keep that thing that, the drones, the sensors, the flight plan, the flight operations, this is kind of the easy stuff. Right, and then we can go out there and launch our drones. Here you're going to see me in action in my snowmobile suit. You just toss it up in the air and Skynet is self-aware, right? It just goes off and it does its thing and then it comes back when it's done. Here we are operating -2 degrees and all we're getting is a signal of where that drone is and it's capturing the pictures, and then when it comes back down, look at that, right into the backstop there of that baseball field. Fantastic, right? Everything's entirely autonomous. So this is kind of pretty easy stuff. And thanks to the geniuses behind computer vision, right, we can take thousands upon thousands of photos that we captured of the Great Brook, shove them into a software like Pix4D or Acrosoft, and out at the end, we're going to get ortho photos and point cloud. It's really amazing, right? For those of us that remember the socket set days, right, where we identifying tie points between images, how long is that going to take you to do when you've got 1,300 images and each image has 80% overlap, meaning at any point on the ground, you've got perhaps 5 or 10 overlapping photos. You're probably talking about months of manual labor. Now we fly in the morning, we kick off the processing, and the next day we have ortho photos, right? Really revolutionizing the way we can collect remotely sensed data. All right? So now let's take a look about the products that come out of this and how we did the woody debris mapping. And so a lot has changed with drones, but a lot has not changed. And so I've got, Keith was kind of like the first generation of who I actually pull my map monkeys who do my digitizing. But now I'm on like generation 14 of these, right? And so for the woody debris mapping, it's pretty similar. We're not using machine learning or artificial intelligence, right? We've got 3 miles of stream. By the time I spin up any automated system, I can have a few undergrads, hopped up on Cheetos and Red Bull, and they'll be able to identify all these woody debris piles. So we're just talking about still old school GIS here, right? So there's all this new technology, but being able to identify features and appropriately attribute them is still really important. And one of my concerns is that as we get into all these new things with artificial intelligence and used to be support vector machine and random forest, we've got all these people that have these great statistical skills. But have you ever been to the field and do you know enough to be identify piles of woody debris? And can you effectively distinguish them and attribute them so that we have useful information? And those types of cognitive skills are something that we need to ensure that we're still developing in our students, right? We're just doing this, pick your desktop GIS software package, ArcGIS, or now it's ArcManager and ArcPro, right? QGIS, doesn't make a difference. We're just going through attributing these things over time. And then when we fly again, you're seeing, is that piece of woody debris still there, right? Has it gained or lost woody debris? Or is it completely removed, right? All that kind of stuff. And of course, what's really amazing, is the fact that we can just take all these images now, and thanks to the brilliant minds in computer vision, right, generate these awesome point clouds. This is not LiDAR, this is just straight up, photogrammetry, still blows my mind, right? The fact that we can have a look at this whole 3-mile stream corridor now, and then even go into areas and make really, really accurate measurements. And we're flying our drones here with onboard RTK, which means that our ability to make horizontal measurements where we're doing 1 or 3 centimeters generally at the true location without any ground control, and then our ability to make relative height measurements is generally within 10 centimeters. Okay, so this is really, really amazing technology. You can imagine that in a stream like this, where there's one bridge to get across, we would lay out ground control for this whole thing, how long we would be out there. So the fact that we've got onboard RTK, where we can either go through a cores network and use PPK or set up a base station with the RTK, right? Our ability to capture accurate data so that our images overlay precisely from one time to another. Really, really revolutionary. Fortunately, someone else has solved that problem for us. Okay, and then we can do things like go ahead and throw this stuff into web maps. And we thought this is what the community would be really excited about. And the engineering company, we can show them all their photos, right? We can show them all the hours that we spent digitizing and woody debris and all of that stuff. But knowing in Plainfield is good bandwidth so they can access these maps right? So that was great. I'm glad we spent hours with that. Because what really everyone cared about, okay, and no videos right now, Michael, for this one, thanks. What they really cared about was just some very, very simple statistics, right? So there's all this fancy technology, right? We're flying drones, we put all these hours and develop a nice checklist. We've got hard hats with our logo, we've got shirts with American flags on our sleeve, we've got fancy safety vests, and then we realized we looked like posers if our safety vests were used, so we wanted to rub them in the mud before we got out there, so we looked like real construction workers. All this effort, right? But in the end, people just really wanted some simple stats. And so what we did in this case is we just chunked up the river into intervals, indicated by these little triangles here, and then for each time period, we summarized, for the change between before or after that storm, we summarized the amount of woody debris that was gained in these areas, right? So here we've got the amount of woody debris gained in each one of these stream segments, and here we've got the amount of debris lost. Now, why was this important? It was important because we went to one of the initial town meetings. Some of the folks in the room, being industrious Vermonters, they said, well, it's like 12, 20, right, pieces of logs, gather at the bridge. Just need to get some folks on the weekend with our chainsaws, march up the stream and just cut those big logs into smaller pieces. And that way, when the storm comes, it's just going to flow right through the bridge and we're going to be good. What we found is that they couldn't have been more wrong. They didn't just have a dozen pieces. Maybe there's a dozen pieces they get out of the bridge. When we have these major storm events, they've got hundreds of pieces of woody debris moving through that system. And they're going to need to have the transportation infrastructure, that bridge, to be able to accommodate that. And that was the key thing that Trevor Technology showed. So the most useful products that came out of all of this were not even those maps. It was these simple bar charts that said for small piles of woody debris, for large piles of woody debris, what was happening within that system. Okay? And that allowed people to make the decision they needed to do. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back here. And we also went out, you can click this one, Michael. We also went out and integrated this in mobile apps. We forgot to shoot a video when we were out there, so this is a reenactment of the stream near campus where I made an undergraduate get dressed up in safety gear and go to a stream that is like a tenth of the size of the actual one to show us using the mobile app, right? But we were able to integrate this stuff, and so we've had a nice little fields campaign, citizen science thing with people in the communities where we loaded the imagery in and they could go out and feel that we were making the right call by verifying the amount of thing is when you've got 1 to 2 centimeter resolution UAS imagery, you really don't need to do that much in the way of ground truthing anymore. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, what happened at the end of this? Well, we got some news coverage, which was great. Unfortunately, it's from the mainstream fake news media, but that's okay. We'll take that, right? We did get on the front page of the local paper, and it was really encouraging. I went in and looked at the likes, and I got really excited. There were 183 Facebook views, but then I realized I had sent it to my mom, and she said, "Oh, I've just been clicking on that page all day. I think it's the greatest thing." So she was probably responsible for 180 things. So there we have it, right? But the important thing here is that the engineering company, Malone Group, was able to present a bridge design to the community, right? So when we think about drone technology and geospatial, what it comes to in the end is someone able to make a better decision? And it's fun to think about all the trade-offs between rotary wing and fixed wing and what sensors do we need and this and that. But in the end, we have to get to the point where we help people make decisions. And in some cases, that's going to be leveraging really cool technology. I mean, the fact that I can toss a drone up in the air and it knows where to map based on a pre-programmed flight plan, amazing. Stitching those photos together in Pix4D, really, really revolutionary. But then again, a lot of that work is simply old school GIS stuff, where we're doing the things that are not that different. We also won an award, the Excellence in the Regional Transportation Awards, which no one knows about unless they've ever received an Excellence in the Regional Transportation Award. But there you have it. Now, I'd like to talk about the transition here, what we learned, and I think this really lines up with a lot of the stuff that Carl was talking about yesterday. So this is one of 683 missions that our team has done. This includes everything from mapping poppy plantations in Hawaii to flood inundation response in Tahoe, California, coastal erosion mapping in Cape Cod, and then doing landfill volumetric change within New England. So we've done all these different types of things. We've worked with state organizations in 3 different states where we've looked at case studies and the challenges of implementing UAS technology into their organizations. And this is some of the key takeaways that I'd like you to leave with today. And it's not about the drones. And it's not even about whether you should use Pix4D or Agisoft or Open Drones. If that's what you're fixated on for UAS technology, you're simply not looking at the complete picture. So what are the important things here? Carl mentioned this yesterday, the basics still matter. And it's not just digitizing. As soon as we go to UAS technology, and especially because we can generate these wonderful 3D models, right, understanding the basics like coordinate systems, and especially vertical datums, because we're in 3D space, become really important, especially as we seek to integrate our UAS-based surface models with existing ones from LiDAR and survey data. There's a lot of things you can get away with when you've got 30-meter resolution Landsat data, right? Kind of looks like it's roughly in the right location. Really hard to get away with stuff when you've got 2-centimeter imagery. You're integrating that with high-resolution LiDAR and some survey-grade data. And so the fundamentals have become really, really important again, all right? And sometimes it's easy to get caught up in all this machine learning and web mapping stuff, but this stuff really does matter when it comes down to terms. We're seeing increasingly state agencies are putting UAS under their aeronautics division, okay? That's good from a regulatory and safety standpoint, but it ignores the fact that this is just a platform from which in many cases we're using it to derive geospatial technology. And there's a lot of well-meaning aeronautics people out there, but if they don't involve the GIS folks in the discussion, they're really not thinking through the entire workflow. Once again, if I can fly a drone, right, just by tossing it up in the air, that is not really the issue anymore. The issue is how we work with these data. Okay? The other issue we see is that consolidation, okay, of GIS professionals in state agencies really, really hampers the use of UAS technology. Okay, Carl gave me some cool new terms that I can throw around from yesterday, like talk about edge computing, right? How moving the processing from the cloud back to the mobile device, right? Maybe I'll come up with a new term like, edge analysis. Okay, as soon as you have UAS, okay, the centralization that we've seen in state government, where let's just pool all these GIS people that needs to be in different departments and working with an individual team, let's get them centralized, and we can have a centralized request process. UAS really turns that up on its head, and that model doesn't work anymore. As soon as you're acquiring technology in the field, or acquiring data in the field, you're processing it quickly, you need to be integrated with those organizations that need to make those decisions, okay? If you're a right-of-way inspector or a bridge inspector, right, or someone who does airport planning, it becomes really cumbersome if you have to have someone fly the drone from aeronautics, and then you make a request for someone from GIS to analyze that data, and you may not have the technology and skills within your organization to make use of that. It's one of the barriers that we see. The data deluge from UAS technology, although we're flying very small areas, it is substantial, okay? You know, our biggest cost in our UAS budget is not platforms, sensors, or even the unreliable lithium-ion batteries that we have, okay? It's our data storage. And this becomes increasingly important. Paul mentioned yesterday data provenance and things like that. You always want to preserve your original UAS data because the processing algorithms that we use to generate things like orthomosaics and surface models are really improving. So you may fly an area like 2 years ago. We did some surfaces where they were really covered with snow and the point matching failed. Come back, run that 2 years later, the algorithms improved, and now we can get good products from those. So preserving those data products. And then finally, drones are really disruptive technology to these state organizations, right? And sometimes they are really, really ill prepared to accommodate this. And this could be because the individual units within that state agency that want to make use of this technology do not have GIS or CAD people. Maybe they haven't upgraded their software in years. Okay, we routinely work with groups and you send them something like JPEG 2000, but they're running AutoCAD version 1998. They have no idea how to even open that image. Okay? In other cases, people within the organization see this technology as a threat. Okay, it may be something that removes their jobs. And in other cases, things that we do with drones simply screw up people's entire workflow. If you're a bridge inspector and you've been out there, and every time you inspect that bridge once a year for federal regulations, you fill out a form. And now we go out and we give you a 6 gigabyte LAS file point cloud, and then we give you hundreds of different photos taken from different angles, and then we give you a virtual reality 3D model on Sketchpad. You've never seen any of this stuff before. This is not helping your job at all. This is just bogging you down in data. So unless you have the people in your organization that can effectively make use of this data and turn it into information, it's not doing anything for us. And so I would say that this is why it's important for those of us who are GIS professionals to be involved in this process. Because once again, it's not about flying drones. It's about how we turn those data into information so that we can make better decisions within our organization. So thanks for showing up at 8 a.m. and if there's time, certainly happy to entertain any questions. Yes.
Here in the state of Minnesota, you have to have access to drones.
I don't care about federal regulations. No. This is a really good point, right? There's federal regulations, line of sight, right? Positive communication context, right? So we could fly that whole stream corridor. We could just pre-program the EV, send it up, it would fly the whole thing. Doesn't matter, no line of sight, no radio communications. It would do it, it would come back and land, and we would just be fine. But we cannot do that because of federal regulations. So in that case, what we're doing is we're leapfrogging up the stream to ensure that we have positive communications and line of sight. And I think this is one of the major challenges with UAS technology, is the technology is way ahead of the regulations, right? And so we spend far more time knocking on people's doors, convincing them to let us launch off of their property, right, than we do probably with any flight plan. Now, we're from Vermont, so it's like free love and Ben & Jerry's, so that goes well. You know, we've also had projects across in New Hampshire, and as you know, New Hampshire, what does it say on their license plate? Live free or die. So as soon as you knock on someone's door, you know, they're really excited about you flying drones so that they can shoot them down, right? So we had a great time out there where we were out flying our drones, and you know, two of us there in our safety vests staring up the sky, and some guy rolls up in his pickup truck and he says, "Boys, what kind of communist conspiracy you got going on here?" And I said, "Sir, if you like communist conspiracies, today is your day. Who's flying drones?" Eventually convinced him to get out of his pickup truck, and he told me about how I was going to shoot it down. And I said, "We've been flying all morning," and he totally miss it, you know, in situational awareness, but then we flew his properties and some pictures to him, and I got a nice thank you note from his wife, so it worked out well. But I think that brings up an important point, getting sidetracked here, right? That the public perception of these things, you know, we really have to get in front of it. And one of the things that helped us in Vermont was that the town of Plainfield now, whenever we run into any issues in the state, the legislature wants to pass restrictions on drones, I can just call up the town of Plainfield, and I've got folks there within the community that will advocate for us. And I think that's really powerful. You find those projects where you made a difference to someone who is not a GIS professional, you know, the floodplain manager in the town of Plainfield, like that is a volunteer job. He's a flower farmer by day, but I can call up Brand and he will advocate for us to any state legislation we need to. Yes?
Talk about the Amtrak crash.
Oh yeah, so one of the things we responded to early on also was a train derailment. We had an Amtrak crash in Vermont where there was some erosion from a slope that came down, rocks on the track, the train derailed. Fortunately, really only minor injuries, although you can go online and see some of the pictures that we took, but a really significant train derailment with a number of cars completely off the rails. That was another good example, right, of where we were able to get out there really, really quickly, capture information, and not just pictures of the train derailment, but ortho-rectified geospatial products that then both the NTSB and the Amtrak investigators could integrate with other geospatial products to, you know, investigate the cores and things like that. Thanks for that softball. Yes?
What other sensor types are going to get small enough to be on these besides video and still?
Yeah, so this is a good question, you know, and one of the things that those of us that come from spectral remote sensing, like Landsat and things like that, like, we're constantly thinking about how can we get more bands and more wavelengths and things like that. I would say that the two things that are the most important to keep in mind when it comes to UAS technology is the spatial resolution and temporal resolution. You can accomplish an awful lot by capturing high-resolution data at the right time. Right, so up until now, the way we've done things like species identification is we find the right wavelengths, right? We've got a lot of invasive species in the East Coast that just green up before anything else. All you have to do is fly your drone at the right time and you can find those invasive species. So the first thing I will say is in many cases where we thought we would need some fancy sensor, we actually don't as long as we stop and apply domain expertise to the problem. Right, and this is once again, I think, the point that I often have, where we've got all these people that became really comfortable with statistics, and if you don't understand where your species green up, you're going to miss these things. But to your point, Howard, about, you know, some of these other sensors, you know, one of the challenges with drones is that perhaps, you know, the major technical challenge is the limitations of that battery, right? So just like, you know, I've got this iPhone 6 now that has about, you know, 93 minutes of useful life before the battery dies. You know, lithium-ion batteries are a major problem in literature. And as soon as we start adding fancier sensors, whether it's multispectral or hyperspectral, we increase the weight. As soon as we increase the weight, we need a bigger battery. Once we need a bigger battery, we need a bigger platform. As soon as we start adding active sensors, whether it be LiDAR or radar, then we need another battery to power that system. And then what we've seen in some cases, well, I'm not against it, but with LiDAR systems, right, we go from a 1.6 pound, you know, flying piece of styrofoam, right, to maybe a 30 to 50 pound octocopter. It's a big thing. If I lose power on a 1.6 pound styrofoam and it comes down and hits you in the head, you're going to be annoyed at me. If I lose power on a 50 pound drone and it falls out of the sky, which is within the 55 pound FAA regs, and that lands on you, you know, you won't be annoyed at me because you'll be dead. Okay? And this is important safety things. The other thing is that your flight time really becomes limited with these heavier sensors. And with LiDAR, you also need to keep in mind that as you shrink that sensor down, right, it becomes a lot less powerful. So sometimes you may be getting amazing point densities with UAS LiDAR, 50, 80, 100 points per square meter, but the actual penetration you get through the canopy may not be all that fantastic because it's a smaller version of the sensor. So the good thing is that sensors are always going to get smaller. I think sensors are not the biggest advancement we need in UAS technology. I think it's going to be more on the regulatory side. And then I think batteries. You know, if we can improve batteries, then we're going to be able to do so much more. So once Elon Musk, you know, miniaturizes these things so we can put them on drones, we'll be good stuff. Yes?
You said you use photos. More or less took photos.
Yep.
Were you utilizing an existing LiDAR again or an existing DEM?
Yeah, so the question was, since we're using photos, where we're using the existing LiDAR data. For this particular project, we didn't need to for identifying the woody debris. That was not necessary. For other projects, we will. In some cases, we're looking at things like stream channel change and erosion. Or maybe in other cases, what we'll have is we'll have LiDAR for a very large area, but a change has happened in some location, and then we'll fly the drone and we'll integrate these products. We did one particular project like that where all the data streams, so it was survey data from the ground, airborne LiDAR from manned aircraft, and our drone data, all of which were rated to be within plus or minus 10 centimeter accuracy, none of which were even close to that when compared to each other, right? And so I was getting all wrapped up in this stuff, and someone screwed up the vertical data, but then I talked to the people on the engineering program, well, we just care about the relative accuracy, so you just kind of blind them all and squish them together and make the best of it, and actually works out just well. But these are some of the real challenges of when you want to bring your data. The only, even with these great drones with RTK and all of that, the only way you know you're accurate is if the surveyor is out there. So, there's a lot of stuff in the drone community where it's like, this is going to replace surveying. Well, unless your surveyor is out there, you don't know if you're any good. And what we find is that surveyors are generally excited about drone technology because if you couple existing survey efforts with a drone effort, now they've got imagery acquired that's current and perhaps a topographic model of a broader area that they can integrate their survey data with. So you don't have those standard engineering maps. It's always like, you go to an engineering conference, you go to the map contest, it's like black lines on white background. Makes my photographic skills look really, really awesome. Any other questions? Yes?
At what point do you switch over from a Cessna or a manned aircraft to a drone?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Generally, we say for when you're thinking UAS, think in the order of a few hundred acres. Okay, so the project we did in Hawaii, 6 days of flying, I think it was around 2,000 acres, 16,000 images. That's really pushing it for UAS technology, right? So as soon as you're thinking of thousands of acres, unless you're willing to spend a lot of time flying, you're probably better off beginning to look at either traditional piloted aircraft or satellite-based acquisition in those cases, right? Because the drones do have those limitations associated with them, right? And there's a point at which you're flying so much it's no longer cost.